January 1944. The air is brittle and sharp over a remote POW camp in northern Germany. Frost clings to the wooden barracks, crunching beneath the boots of guards making their rounds. Inside, the prisoners stir in uneasy silence. Women, accustomed to rationed bread and endless gray days, peer through narrow slits in the barracks walls, their breath fogging the cold air. Rumors had traveled across the camp, whispers of Allied pilots who were not men. Suddenly, the distant roar of engines breaks the monotony. Shadows of sleek aircraft glide across the snow-blanketed fields. Hearts pound as figures descend from the planes, flight suits cutting through the winter light, helmets clasped firmly, goggles reflecting the harsh sun. Every movement is precise, confident. The German women prisoners freeze, astonished. For many, it is the first time they have seen soldiers of the opposite sex moving in roles they had deemed impossible. Shock ripples through the camp, mingled with awe, curiosity, and an unspoken recognition that the world they thought they understood is shifting in front of them. A moment suspended in time. The story of these pilots, and the eyes that could not believe what they saw, begins here. By 1943, the war had reached a critical stage. Across Europe, the skies had become a theater of relentless contest. The Allies, pushing to establish air superiority over German-occupied territories, were expanding every facet of their air campaigns. From the bombed-out streets of London to the coastal airfields of southern England, pilots and ground crews prepared for missions that would test endurance, courage, and ingenuity. Amid this aerial struggle, women were quietly reshaping the battlefield. In Britain, the Women's Auxiliary Air Force, WAF, operated communications, navigational plotting, and meteorological analysis. Across the Atlantic, the United States had mobilized the Women Air Force Service Pilots, WASP, trained to ferry aircraft, test planes, and even tow targets for live gunnery practice. These women wore the same flight suits, carried the same maps, and handled the same aircraft as men, challenging deeply ingrained norms of who could serve in war. The pilots themselves were young, many barely out of their teens, and rigorously trained. They mastered a variety of aircraft, fighters like the P-51 Mustang, bombers such as the B-17 Flying Fortress, and nimble trainers and transports essential to logistics. Each flight demanded precision, and every mission carried an acute awareness of risk. Flying into enemy airspace, they faced not only anti-aircraft fire and Luftwaffe interceptors, but also skepticism from those who doubted a woman could endure the rigors of combat-related aviation. Meanwhile, across the Rhine and in the heart of occupied Germany, women prisoners of war experienced a vastly different reality. These were German women who, through circumstance, ideology, or proximity to conflict, had become captives. POW camps in 1943 to 44 were tightly controlled, austere, and regimented. Barracks were cold, food scarce, and freedom non-existent. Daily life was punctuated by guard patrols, roll calls, and the quiet tension of unspoken despair. Letters from home were sporadic. News of the broader war often arrived late, filtered through propaganda or rumor. In this controlled world, the idea of women as military operators, particularly in the skies, seemed almost fantastical. The rigid hierarchy of German military culture assigned women to supportive or civilian roles, far removed from combat or tactical decision-making. Even as the Allies embraced female pilots, German women prisoners understood their own position in stark contrast. Immobile, observed, constrained by both the enemy and the structures of their own society. Yet, the presence of women in uniform on the front lines was not merely symbolic. It reflected strategic necessity. By 1943, pilot shortages, particularly in the British and American Air Forces, had demanded an expansion of recruitment beyond traditional male candidates. Women were trained in aircraft recognition, instrument navigation, and long-distance flight procedures. Their contributions ensured that fighter planes could be delivered to combat zones, bombers repaired and tested, and critical reconnaissance carried out with greater efficiency. In a war measured in tons of supplies, sortie counts, and miles flown, every mission mattered. The convergence of these two worlds, the constrained life of German female prisoners and the purposeful, high-stakes role of Allied women pilots, was almost inevitable as the air war intensified. For the prisoners, the war was a series of waiting rooms and missed opportunities. For the pilots, it was an orchestration of precision, timing, and skill. Both were defined by discipline, yet the consequences of action and inaction could not have been more different. By early 1944, Allied air campaigns were increasingly visible over occupied Europe. Airfields buzzed with activity, engines roared, and reconnaissance reports detailed enemy movements. Every overflight carried the risk of interception or anti-aircraft fire, but also the possibility of strategic gain. The women pilots, flying the same missions as men, were a tangible manifestation of the shifting roles of gender in wartime. Their very existence on the airfields of England and their presence over enemy territory challenged both expectation and stereotype. As winter deepened, the stage was set. The camps held their captives in frozen silence, while the skies above bore witness to an unseen revolution. What would happen when these worlds collided? When the rigid confines of the POW barracks met the confident, purposeful stride of women trained to operate the machinery of war. This tension between captivity and flight, between expectation and reality, would soon erupt in a moment that stunned those who believed they had already seen everything the war could offer. The preparation of women pilots for wartime duties was meticulous and unrelenting. In Britain, women enrolled in the Air Transport Auxiliary, ATA, underwent a rigorous program of instruction that mirrored that of their male counterparts. They learned to pilot a wide range of aircraft, from light trainers to frontline fighters and medium bombers, often with minimal hours on each type before being entrusted to fly them solo. Precision and discipline were essential. Errors could be fatal, both in training and in operational flights. Across the Atlantic, the Women Air Force Service pilots, WASP, in the United States were engaged in similar work, ferrying aircraft from factories to air bases, testing repaired planes, and even towing targets for live gunnery. Flight suits, helmets, and life vests were not costumes. They were instruments of survival. Each uniform represented authority, competence, and the breaking of societal boundaries that had long confined women to the home front. For the pilots, each mission was a test not only of skill, but of resilience against skepticism, danger, and the constant threat of enemy fire. Meanwhile, in the German POW camps, the reality for captive women could not have been more different. They were kept in austere barracks, often with inadequate heating and meager rations. Daily routines were regimented, punctuated by roll calls, inspections, and the ever-present watch of guards. News from a front was filtered, delayed, or distorted by propaganda, leaving prisoners with a limited understanding of the war's progression. For many, the idea that women could serve in frontline aviation seemed preposterous, even subversive. The very notion challenged entrenched gender norms that defined military roles strictly along male lines. This clash of perception and reality was compounded by technology. Allied women pilots were entrusted with aircraft that were marvels of engineering. The nimble Spitfire, capable of near supersonic speeds and dives, the twin-engine Airspeed Oxford trainers, and the heavy four-engine bombers that carried critical payloads over occupied Europe. Flight suits were tailored for endurance, insulated against altitude chill, and equipped with pockets for maps, flight logs, and survival gear. To the German prisoners, the combination of machine and uniform symbolized autonomy and authority, qualities they had been denied within the camp walls. The broader war context heightened the impact of these encounters. By 1944, The Allies were preparing for major operations in Western Europe, including the impending D-Day landings. The success of air campaigns was increasingly dependent on the efficient movement of personnel and material. Women pilots were integral to this effort, their contributions invisible to many but essential to the functioning of a global war machine. They represented a subtle but profound challenge to enemy assumptions, not through combat alone, but through the demonstration of skill, discipline, and resilience that rivaled any male counterpart. German officers, aware of the strategic importance of Allied air operations, had little precedent for confronting female pilots. Their surprise, and at times, disbelief mirrored the shock that the POWs would soon experience firsthand. The arrival of women in uniform was a tangible reminder that the conflict was evolving, not only in scale and technology, but in the very roles individuals could occupy. In the stark landscape of the POW camp, the presence of such women would become an unforgettable rupture in the monotony of captivity. It is important to recognize that these women pilots were not merely symbolic figures. Their actions, whether ferrying aircraft, conducting reconnaissance, or supporting combat missions, carried measurable operational weight. Each successful flight reduced strain on the male combat pilots, accelerated the delivery of aircraft to critical fronts, and reinforced the broader Allied air strategy. Their skill and professionalism earned respect, even from those who initially doubted their capabilities, and in some cases, left an indelible impression on enemy observers who witnessed their discipline and courage firsthand. As the frost deepened across northern Germany, the POWs remained in the quiet confines of their barracks. Outside, engines roared, aircraft cut through icy skies, and women pilots continued their missions with unwavering precision. The stage was set for a convergence of worlds: the constrained, regimented life of German prisoners and the confident, disciplined presence of Allied women in flight. It was an encounter that would redefine perception, provoke astonishment, and leave a lasting mark on those who witnessed it. For the German women prisoners, life had been a series of predictable routines: roll calls, inspections, and the monotonous passage of frozen days. They had grown accustomed to the silence of confinement, broken only by the distant roar of engines or the footsteps of guards. When rumors reached them of women pilots serving in the Allied air forces, disbelief was the immediate response. The very notion that women could don flight suits, handle complex aircraft, and operate in a theater dominated by men seemed implausible. Yet, when the pilots finally appeared, the sight shattered expectations. Eyes widened, mouths opened silently, and a stunned stillness took hold. Fear mingled with awe. Here were women commanding machines of war, their confidence radiating in every gesture. For the prisoners, it was both a jarring contrast to their own constrained existence and a subtle affirmation that courage and skill transcended the walls of a camp. The second angle is technological. The aircraft themselves were symbols of the Allies' growing advantage in the air war. Sleek Spitfires, versatile Hurricanes, and sturdy twin-engine transports were more than machines. They were instruments of strategy and survival. The women pilots navigated these complex machines with precision, understanding the nuances of engine performance, airspeed, and altitude. Flight suits were carefully designed for protection and mobility, insulated against sub-zero temperatures at high altitudes, and equipped with pockets for maps, altimeters, and survival gear. Goggles shielded their eyes from wind and glare, while helmets muffled the roar of engines. For the German prisoners observing from below, these details underscore the competence and professionalism of the aviators. The juxtaposition of the pilot's technological mastery against the prisoner's powerless stillness heightened the impact of the encounter, leaving an indelible impression on all who witnessed it. The third angle is leadership. Allied commanders had made deliberate decisions to integrate women into operational roles. These decisions were pragmatic, driven by shortages of trained pilots and the increasing demands of the air campaign. Yet they were also symbolic, signaling a broader transformation in military organization. By entrusting women with critical responsibilities, ferrying fighters and bombers, testing repaired aircraft, or managing logistical flights, commanders challenged entrenched biases and expanded the pool of skilled personnel. Each successful mission reinforced the legitimacy of these decisions. The leadership message was clear: competence, not gender, determined suitability for critical wartime roles. For German observers, and particularly for female prisoners conditioned to believe in rigid gender hierarchies, this demonstration of authority and capability was both provocative and disorienting. The fourth angle is tactical. Women pilots were integrated into operations in ways that optimized efficiency and strategic outcomes. Ferrying aircraft from factories to airbases freed male combat pilots for frontline missions, accelerating the delivery of critical resources. Training in diverse aircraft types ensured adaptability in unpredictable situations. Pilots could navigate through adverse weather, avoid enemy patrols, and maintain tight schedules, all while adhering to the operational demands of a high-stakes theater. Their presence directly contributed to the operational tempo of the Allied air forces, allowing missions to proceed on time and reducing logistical bottlenecks. From a tactical perspective, their impact was quantifiable. Aircraft delivered faster, maintenance cycles shortened, and the overall readiness of air operations improved. The German prisoners, unaware of these calculations, witnessed only the outward manifestation: women in flight suits, commanding machines that once seemed the exclusive domain of men. As these angles intersected, the stage was set for astonishment. The human reaction of disbelief, the technological mastery on display, the deliberate orchestration of leadership, and the tactical efficiency all converged in a single, unforgettable moment. The women pilots were not merely passing through. They embodied a paradigm shift, illustrating that skill, courage, and duty were not defined by gender. The convergence of these perspectives created a tension that was almost tangible. Prisoners observed not only an unexpected display of competence, but also a challenge to their understanding of the world. The presence of women in roles traditionally denied to them provoked questions about authority, capability, and the assumptions of wartime society. It was a moment that demanded attention, reflection, and, in some cases, reluctant admiration. The fifth angle is the enemy perspective. For German officers and camp administrators, the sudden appearance of women pilots in uniform was a source of confusion and, in some cases, unease. Military culture in Germany at the time strictly adhered to traditional gender roles. Combat and operational authority were seen as male domains, while women were relegated to supportive, civilian, or auxiliary roles. Reports of female pilots operating aircraft capable of influencing the air war were often met with skepticism. Some officers dismissed the notion outright, considering it propaganda or exaggeration. Yet when confronted with the reality, women confidently taxiing aircraft, communicating with control towers, and executing missions with precision, their assumptions were challenged. The experience forced a reluctant acknowledgement of competence beyond traditional expectations. German POWs observed this tension silently, sensing that the rigid hierarchies they had internalized were being quietly subverted, even if the officers themselves struggled to admit it. The sixth angle is moral and psychological. The presence of women pilots carried implications beyond strategy or logistics. It provoked a deeper reflection on societal norms and the psychology of war. For the German prisoners, seeing women in roles they had been conditioned to believe impossible was both inspiring and unsettling. Awe and admiration mingled with confusion as the sight confronted long-held beliefs about gender, capability, and authority. Some prisoners reportedly felt a sense of hope, however subtle, recognizing that courage and competence could exist in forms previously dismissed or denied. Others wrestled with resentment or disbelief, challenged by the realization that the enemy could not only match but exceed expectations in ways that disrupted conventional thinking. Psychologically, the encounter created a rupture in perception, an opening for critical thought, even under the constraints of captivity. This moral dimension extended to the pilots themselves. Operating in a male-dominated environment, they faced constant scrutiny and, at times, overt skepticism. Each successful flight validated their role, reinforced their self-confidence, and subtly reshaped broader perceptions of what women could achieve under the pressures of war. The combination of skill, composure, and visibility made them powerful symbols of resilience. To those witnessing from the ground, particularly prisoners accustomed to limitations imposed by both the enemy and their own societal norms, the pilots embodied a quiet, persuasive form of moral authority. Another important consideration is the cultural impact. The convergence of these worlds, the structured confinement of POW life, and the disciplined freedom of the pilots, highlighted the contrast between rigid expectation and operational reality. In Germany, women were largely excluded from combat roles, yet here were their counterparts actively shaping the war through skill and initiative. The site challenged assumptions about gender hierarchies, military competence, and the role of women in high-stakes environments. For prisoners and officers alike, the encounter was a visual lesson in capability, demonstrating that competence, courage, and authority were not bound by conventional norms. Taken together, these angles reveal the multifaceted significance of the encounter. Human astonishment, technological mastery, strategic leadership, tactical efficiency, enemy perception, and moral psychological resonance all intersected in a single, potent moment. It was not simply a meeting of women with aircraft. It was a collision of expectation, skill, and societal preconception. Each perspective adds depth to the understanding of why the event left such a profound impression on those who witnessed it, framing the story for its climactic moment. It was early February 1944, just after dawn. The frost still clung to the edges of the camp, glinting on the wire fences that confined the prisoners. Inside the barracks, a tense silence prevailed. The women POWs, accustomed to the monotony of regimented life, pressed their faces against frosted windows. They had heard the distant hum of engines before, but today was different. The sound carried a sharpness, a confidence, and it seemed impossibly precise. Then the aircraft appeared, sleek shapes cut through the low winter sun, their polished metal reflecting the faint light. The prisoners' eyes widened as the planes touched down on the nearby makeshift airstrip. From the cockpits descended women in full-flight suits, their movements deliberate and exact. Helmets secured, goggles in place, gloves fastened. Each action radiated competence honed through rigorous training. There was no hesitation, no uncertainty. They moved as though the machines beneath them were extensions of themselves. The POWs froze. Some clutched the wooden window sills, afraid to blink, afraid to disrupt the impossible tableau before them. Others simply stared, breath shallow, as if the very air had become too heavy to inhale. These women, whose existence in military aviation had previously been rumor, stood before them with undeniable reality. Flight suits, sturdy boots, and the faint smell of oil and leather conveyed authority and autonomy. The air around them seemed charged with energy, a contrast to the muted, constrained life of the camp. From a tactical perspective, the scene was deliberate. The pilots were conducting a routine ferry and inspection operation, yet the precision of their approach underscored the training and discipline that characterized the Allied air forces. Every step, every adjustment of straps and instruments was exact, reflecting hours of practice and meticulous preparation. To the prisoners, it was almost theatrical, yet it was grounded in necessity and operational rigor. The German officers present could hardly conceal their unease. They had been briefed on the presence of women pilots, but had not anticipated witnessing the efficiency, confidence, and professionalism firsthand. A subtle tension rippled through their ranks as the women pilots completed their tasks with calm, measured motions. This was not a publicity stunt. This was capability demonstrated without fanfare, an assertion of skill and authority that could not be dismissed. The psychological impact on the POWs was profound. For many, this was the first time they had witnessed women actively occupying roles previously deemed impossible. Shock gave way to fascination. Some felt admiration. Others struggled with disbelief. A quiet murmur spread among the barracks, a recognition that the boundaries they had internalized, both socially and militarily, were being challenged in a tangible, undeniable way. It was a lesson in competence, courage, and resilience, delivered without words. Observers noted small but telling details. The precise way a pilot adjusted her goggles before climbing back into the cockpit, the confident stride across the tarmac, the subtle nod exchanged with ground crew. Each gesture reinforced the message that these were not anomalies. They were trained, capable operatives executing their duties with professionalism equal to any male counterpart. For the prisoners, every movement carried meaning, each one a quiet assertion of autonomy and skill in contrast to their own constrained existence. The tension reached its apex as the pilots prepared to depart. Engines roared, propellers slicing the cold air, creating a vibration that shook the barracks floor. Prisoners pressed closer to the windows, eyes fixed on the departing aircraft. For a fleeting moment, the boundary between observer and participant seemed to collapse. The sight of women controlling powerful machines, navigating the skies with authority, left an indelible impression. The POWs understood, viscerally, that the world they had believed static was, in reality, dynamic, shaped not only by men, but by women capable of extraordinary action. This encounter, simple in structure yet rich in meaning, marked a turning point. It was a moment where training, technology, and human courage intersected, producing a lasting psychological and cultural impact. The shock and admiration of the prisoners, combined with the professional precision of the pilots, created a tableau that encapsulated the broader shifts occurring across the theater of war. The aftermath of this moment, the subtle yet profound shifts in perception, morale, and recognition, would unfold in the days and weeks that followed, shaping both the immediate environment of the camp and the broader understanding of women's roles in wartime operations. The engines had settled into a low hum as the pilots completed their checks. Yet the ripples of that morning's arrival extended far beyond the tarmac. The German officers, initially skeptical, were forced to confront a reality that defied expectation. Reports would later note the careful, methodical movements of the women, their ease with the aircraft, and the unmistakable authority they exuded. It was a subtle but undeniable disruption to the entrenched hierarchy that dominated both the camp and the broader military worldview. Prisoners lingered at the windows long after the planes had begun their ascent. Conversations, whispered at first, began to circulate. Observations of skill, confidence, and courage. Some remarked on the pilot's composure, noting the precise way they handled instruments and communicated with ground crews. Others reflected on the audacity of women occupying spaces previously denied to them. Letters and later memoirs recorded astonishment that these figures, small in stature, yet formidable in presence, had navigated complex machines through potentially deadly conditions. It was a demonstration of agency that contrasted sharply with the prisoner's passive confinement. The operational consequences were also tangible. The pilots' departures ensured the timely delivery of aircraft to forward airfields, contributing directly to the Allies' capacity to sustain bombing raids, reconnaissance missions, and ferry operations. Each aircraft moved efficiently, each flight completed with discipline, reinforced the strategic logic behind integrating women into operational roles. Their contribution, though often invisible in official dispatches, was measurable. Faster aircraft rotation, improved readiness, and reduced strain on male pilots, who could then focus on combat sorties. The encounter at the camp, though unexpected, was a direct illustration of the efficiency and professionalism that these women brought to the war effort. The officers' reactions were complex. Some, steeped in traditionalist military culture, responded with disbelief or irritation, seeing the pilots as anomalies rather than equals. Others, more pragmatic, recognized the advantage in utilizing all available talent. The presence of these women forced an adjustment in perception. While policy could not be altered on a single morning, the psychological impact, both on observers and prisoners, was significant. The officers witnessed firsthand that competence was not dictated by gender, and that authority could be projected through skill, discipline, and composure. For the prisoners, the impact was equally profound. A subtle shift in morale occurred, one that was difficult to articulate at the time. Awe, curiosity, and even inspiration mingled with the shock of seeing women operate in a manner they had previously considered impossible. The encounter disrupted the psychological monotony of confinement. For many, it became a reference point, a moment to which they would return in letters, diaries, and post-war reflections. It was not simply the sight of flight suits and aircraft. It was the realization that courage, precision, and agency could exist in forms outside their lived experience, even within the strictures of captivity. Even brief interactions reinforced the impact. Some pilots offered nods or words of acknowledgement to the few prisoners who dared approach the periphery of the airstrip. These gestures, small as they were, humanized the pilots while affirming the agency and dignity of those observing. The psychological resonance of such moments cannot be overstated. In a world dominated by control, monotony, and confinement, a simple acknowledgement became a potent reminder of autonomy and capability. Historians examining the incident note that the encounter was emblematic of broader transformations occurring across the Allied air forces. The integration of women into operational roles, once controversial, demonstrated practical and strategic value. Pilots trained to exacting standards could perform critical duties with efficiency equal to their male counterparts. Their presence, observed under extraordinary circumstances by those unaccustomed to female authority, crystallized an evolving understanding of gender, skill, and contribution in wartime. By midday, the aircraft had departed, leaving a stunned quiet across the camp. Guards and prisoners alike processed what they had witnessed. The moment had passed physically, but its echoes would persist. Morale, perception, and understanding had shifted in subtle but lasting ways. The event, simple in its structure yet rich in consequence, illustrated the intersection of human experience, technological competence, tactical impact, and moral resonance. As the camp returned to routine, the significance of the encounter began to manifest in letters, memoirs, and reports. Prisoners recorded astonishment and admiration. Officers grappled with an unanticipated challenge to conventional thinking. Allied commanders, meanwhile, understood that the integration of women into operational roles had not only practical benefits, but profound symbolic resonance. This convergence of consequences, psychological, operational, and cultural, would shape the immediate aftermath and influence perceptions of women's roles in wartime operations for years to come. The days following the arrival of the women pilots brought a subtle but undeniable shift within the POW camp. For the German women prisoners, The encounter lingered in memory, like the faint vibration of distant engines. Conversations that had been muted under fear and routine now carried whispers of astonishment and admiration. "They can fly? Really fly?" some would murmur, astonished at the precision and confidence they had witnessed. The psychological impact was immediate. A fracture in the monotony of captivity, an injection of wonder into a world defined by constraints. Reports and later memoirs from prisoners described the way the pilot's authority seemed to ripple outward, affecting even those who never left the barracks to see the planes up close. The simple visual of women in flight suits, helmets secured, gloves adjusted, instruments in hand, conveyed autonomy and competence in a way words could not. Observing this, prisoners began to reevaluate assumptions about capability, courage, and the roles women could occupy, even under the rigid hierarchies of wartime society. It was a lesson delivered quietly, without rhetoric, but with undeniable clarity. From an operational perspective, the flights conducted by these women pilots continued to yield practical benefits. Aircraft were delivered to forward airfields more efficiently. Maintenance schedules were accelerated, and male pilots were freed to focus on combat missions. Each successful mission reinforced the strategic logic of employing women in roles that had previously been denied to them. Allied commanders noted that morale among the pilots themselves remained high, with confidence bolstered by recognition of their skill and responsibility. For the enemy, however, the sight of competent women pilots subtly challenged expectations and disrupted assumptions about the distribution of power in the air war. The German officers and guards reacted with a combination of skepticism and reluctant acknowledgement. Some documented the event in official reports, emphasizing the unexpected professionalism of the pilots, while downplaying its significance. Others expressed unease at the implications for traditional gender hierarchies, recognizing, however implicitly, that authority could be exercised effectively by those outside their expected social constructs. Even minor gestures, an officer's brief glance at a departing pilot or a nod of recognition, reflected a begrudging awareness that competence and authority were no longer exclusively male domains. Morale within the camp evolved in nuanced ways. The presence of the pilots and the memory of their visit offered prisoners a quiet sense of possibility. The contrast between constrained, supervised lives and the pilot's purposeful autonomy created a psychological opening. The recognition that courage, skill, and agency could exist outside the parameters enforced by captivity. While it did not alter their immediate circumstances, food remained rationed, barracks remained cold, and freedom remained absent. It offered a fleeting glimpse of a world governed by different rules, a world in which women could act decisively, command respect, and execute tasks with life-or-death precision. Beyond the individual experience, the encounter had subtle cultural and symbolic resonance. For historians and analysts, it became a touchstone for understanding the evolving role of women in wartime operations. The event illustrated that integration of women into operational roles was not merely a matter of manpower necessity, but also a demonstration of adaptability, competence, and strategic innovation. The POW's astonishment, coupled with the officers' reluctant acknowledgement, underscored how perceptions of authority, capability, and societal roles could shift in the presence of demonstrated skill. Letters sent home by prisoners in the weeks following recorded snippets of reflection. One noted, "I have never seen such confidence. They move as though the sky itself obeys them." Another reflected, "If women can do this, then perhaps the world is not as fixed as we have been told." These records, small in scale but rich in insight, captured the subtle yet lasting effects of the encounter, a moment of psychological, cultural, and operational significance, preserved in the memory of those who witnessed it firsthand. As the frost of winter gradually gave way to the early signs of spring, the POWs returned to their routines, but the memory endured. The quiet lesson of skill, courage, and autonomy had been imprinted upon them, shaping perception and expectation in ways that would outlast the immediate circumstances. Beyond the immediate psychological impact on prisoners, the encounter resonated within broader German military circles. Officers and administrators, accustomed to rigid gender hierarchies, were forced to reconcile the reality of women operating in roles previously denied to them. Reports filed after the event frequently noted the skill, precision, and confidence of the Allied pilots. While some attempted to dismiss it as exceptional or anomalous, others acknowledged, quietly and grudgingly, that these women were competent professionals capable of influencing the operational tempo of the war. The observation challenged conventional assumptions about authority, skill, and military utility, creating subtle tension within a culture deeply invested in traditional gender norms. Allied commanders understood the encounter's symbolic weight as well as its practical significance. Women pilots had proven that operational necessity could be matched by discipline and proficiency, and their visible demonstration of capability over enemy territory sent a clear message. In addition to the efficiency gained by ferrying aircraft, testing planes, and performing auxiliary missions, their presence disrupted enemy expectations. The psychological and cultural dimension was as important as the tactical. Seeing women execute these duties with composure and authority undermined stereotypes and reinforced the Allies' adaptability. The prisoners themselves carried the memory into letters, diaries, and post-war testimonies. These records consistently highlight astonishment and admiration. One memoir described the moment as a quiet upheaval of everything we thought we knew about the war and about what women could do. Another emphasized the authority conveyed through simple actions, adjusting a helmet, checking instruments, or walking deliberately across the tarmac. These gestures, seemingly ordinary, became emblematic of competence, courage, and agency. The lasting effect was a subtle shift in perception among women who had been confined, controlled, and constrained. The encounter also had implications for propaganda and morale. While the Germans could not openly celebrate the skill of enemy women pilots, their presence was noted and occasionally referenced in intelligence reports as a curiosity or anomaly. For the Allies, the integration of women into operational roles and their visibility in tasks requiring precision, courage, and technical skill reinforced narratives of unity, efficiency, and the total mobilization of society for war. These pilots became tangible examples of the Allies' capacity to harness all available talent, demonstrating that competence and courage transcended gender, class, and age. Strategically, the impact was indirect but measurable. Each aircraft successfully ferried or mission completed by a woman pilot freed male combat pilots for frontline operations, contributing to the overall effectiveness of the air campaign. Forward airfields received planes on schedule, reconnaissance operations proceeded without interruption, and logistical bottlenecks were alleviated. In a theater where timing, readiness, and precision were critical, these contributions mattered. The POW encounter was a visible illustration of this broader operational integration, demonstrating not only the pilot's skill, but the systemic benefits of including women in essential roles. Over time, historians have interpreted these encounters as pivotal in shaping perceptions of women in military operations. The astonishment of the prisoners, the reluctant acknowledgement of German officers, and the operational success of the pilots together form a tableau of transformation. It was a moment that went beyond immediate circumstance, providing insight into evolving roles, cultural assumptions, and the intersection of skill, authority, and gender in wartime. Even in retrospect, the enduring lesson is clear. The German female prisoners, constrained by captivity, witnessed a quiet but profound disruption of expectation. The women pilots, through training, discipline, and competence, asserted authority in a domain that had long been restricted to men. The psychological, cultural, and operational reverberations of that morning would persist long after the engines fell silent, leaving a legacy that extended beyond the camp itself to the broader understanding of gender, skill, and capability in war. The encounter had concluded physically, but its consequences, shifts in perception, morale, and understanding, were ongoing. It had altered the framework through which prisoners viewed their world, challenged military hierarchies, and provided the Allies with a quiet but powerful demonstration of inclusivity and efficiency. The moment set the stage for reflection, for understanding, and for the enduring recognition of the extraordinary role women played in the skies of World War II. In the cold stillness of that morning, a fleeting encounter revealed more than skill or strategy. It revealed the capacity for courage, resilience, and transformation. The German women prisoners, confined by circumstance and societal expectation, bore witness to a quiet revolution. Women commanding machines of war with authority, precision, and composure. In that moment, the boundaries of possibility were redrawn, not with speeches or proclamations, but with action and presence. The significance extends beyond the individual experience. The pilot's professionalism exemplified the evolving role of women in wartime operations, demonstrating that competence, courage, and discipline were not dictated by gender. Their contribution to the air war, ferrying aircraft, testing machines, and supporting logistical operations, was critical to the broader Allied strategy. Yet it was the symbolic weight of their visibility, their deliberate and confident presence in a traditionally male domain, that left an enduring impression on both observers and the historical record. For the POWs, the encounter became a quiet reference point, a memory of autonomy and authority that contrasted sharply with the confines of captivity. For German officers and administrators, it posed an implicit challenge to entrenched hierarchies and assumptions, forcing a reluctant acknowledgement that skill and leadership could manifest in unexpected forms. Across the broader theater of war, the pilots' work reinforced operational efficiency while simultaneously expanding the perception of what women could accomplish under pressure, in danger, and with responsibility equal to any male counterpart. Ultimately, the story of that morning endures as a testament to human adaptability and the transformative power of action. It reminds us that history is often shaped not only by grand battles or monumental decisions, but by the courage displayed in ordinary, disciplined moments. Moments that challenge assumptions, shift perception, and leave a lasting imprint on those who witness them. In the cold light over the POW camp, the women pilots were more than operators of aircraft. They were agents of change, their presence a subtle but profound declaration that ability, courage, and determination know no gender. And in that recognition lies the enduring lesson. Even amidst conflict, human potential, when realized, can redefine understanding, inspire reflection, and leave a mark far beyond the moment itself.